G'day, mate. Denny from Australia. How are you going? I've got a bit of a think piece for you, so just see if you can follow along. Imagine something like UFC 1 meets the gladiators from back in the day. Whereas they walk down the runway, they get in the cage, they fight, they move on to the next round, but they don't know who they're fighting. So this way they can't train for a specific fight or fighter, so you should maybe get a bit of a more raw talent out. And if this happened by the grace of God or Dana, who do you see being the Spartacus of the lightweight division? Cheers.
You narrow this down to the lightweight division, and I appreciate you doing that because UFC 1, that wasn't the option. They were all just thrown in there, so then some of these conversations are kind of the road to nowhere in make-believe land. I also feel that you touch on another interesting point, which is the guys who came along first, the guys who paved the way and set the table for everybody else, did not know who they were fighting next, separated by less than an hour, and when you got to the final, separated by roughly 20 minutes, and didn't complain and did it anyway. If those guys knew where this sport was going to be today and the prima donnas that they had to deal with that need tape and footage and training camps and all of these different things because they're not ready to fight and they don't want to fight, those guys would probably be a little bit disgusted. And in all fairness, they'd have the right to be. Tournaments are very fun for that very reason. It takes the politics out. That's a hard thing to do in this sport because this is the promotion business. And if business isn't good, the sport doesn't exist. It's as simple and as cutthroat as that. The problem with the tournament is then you can't hype a fight. You can't prepare for it, even on the business side as the promoter. That's the same thing that the athletes have to go through, but it's a wash. You don't get that benefit, but neither does your opponent, which is why you're willing to agree to it. So I really like the way that you set the stage for this. And if you were going to do that with the lightweights, I mean, are you giving me of all time? The way I'm interpreting your question is of all time, because there's only been one guy throughout time who could go with Khabib, and that's BJ Penn. At the time that BJ Penn, and with the skills that BJ had, and as awkward and as hard as he was to wrestle, as good as he was on his back, a master of getting off the bottom, reverse. I mean, BJ Penn had so many different skills, particularly in a 3-round setting, that he is the only guy so far throughout time that you could put in a bracket with Khabib that could give you an argument that he could come out of that thing. And that's the problem with giving you a breakdown of the lightweights. No matter anyone you want to do, any way you want to do it, Khabib's coming through one side and BJ's coming through the other. Those are the two meaningful best guys, but you could have a conversation because BJ had ways to finish fights a little bit quicker than Khabib. So if you're fighting 3 times in a night and BJ goes in there with 2 quick stoppages and Khabib's been out there for a number of rounds, you could have a conversation. But of all of the divisions for who's the best and who stands and the greatest of all time, it is very tough to go against a 28-0 Khabib Nurmagomedov.
Hey, Chael. What fight do you think that has happened or can happen would be the best representation of mixed martial arts on the highest level? For me, I would say that it's John Jones versus Daniel Cormier. And second would be Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington. And I think that once Khabib and Tony happens, that will be listed there as well. So what fights or fight do you think would represent the highest level of mixed martial arts?
It's very tricky for me to narrow this down because I disagree with the term mixed martial arts. Okay, I see a cage fight. That's what I see. And for so many years, that was a belief that steered people away, and they didn't like that, and it had to be about the techniques and the honor and the bowing and the respect, and then they put the word martial arts in there, and nobody understands that they only did that because they were trying to get a bill passed through the Nevada State Legislature in 2001, and they had to call it something, and no holds barred just didn't seem to be quite as acceptable, so they came with the word mixed martial arts. Now, I don't resist the martial arts. I just resist the phenomenon of what you see through Hollywood, through TV, up until 1993 when the sport actually started to be contested, which is vastly different. Which is vastly a cage fight where toughness and grit still weighs out technique. So if you were to ask what fight I have seen would be a good representation of the mixed martial arts, I have to alter it slightly and just tell you what cage fight really represents some of these things. But it's 2 different forms. I mean, every now and then you do have a martial artist Every now and then you will have a Stephen Thompson, a Lyoto Machida that comes along, a Damian Maia, who is very clear in their understanding of unarmed combat, and who is very clear on how they want to get it there. But most times, you're going to have a Kamaru Usman type. You're going to have a straight-up badass that gets into a cage and takes his shirt off and is willing to dig deeper than his opponents. I mean, most times, that's what you're seeing. Matter of fact, now that I brought that up, let me ask you a question. Where would you put Israel Adesanya? Where would you put Israel Adesanya on the scale of tactical martial artist versus cage fighting badass? That's actually an interesting question. I think with how dynamic he is, I think with his understanding and all of his weapons, tools, and abilities, he falls towards martial artists. But when you start to understand the drive that he is, his ability and need and want and absolute desire to be number one, setting his goals over here and willing to crush anyone else's who has alike goals if that's what it means to achieve his. In that regard, he falls under cage fighter. Now, I don't know that I've done the best job of answering your question, but somewhere through your question, I flipped the script because you sparked something in my mind, but I am very sincere when I ask you, and I would like to hear your response. Is Adesanya a martial artist, or is he a cage fighter?
Yo, what's up, Chael? Now that Kevin Lee has been announced to headline against Charles Oliveira instead of Islam, which was a fight that I think everybody wanted to see, what do you think about Islam and Gregor Gillespie?
I think you're going to have a hard time booking that one. I like the fight. I see what you did there. I see the matchup and the two heavy grapplers. I like everything that you're doing there. There is a tradition within the organization. The guys coming off losses fight guys with losses. Guys coming off wins fight guys with wins. Now, there's plenty of exceptions to the rule. I don't disagree with you that skill-wise that's going to work. I would disagree that you'd ever be able to get those guys to agree to it. Islam may do it. I would suspect that Gregor's going to be a little bit more careful. Maybe now that he's coming off a loss, I got it wrong, and he's a little bit more wide open to people's ideas. But I do think that the policy of winner versus winner, loss versus loss, is ultimately what's going to win the day here. And I think that Islam is probably going to end up in there with another guy who we've yet to hear of. For some reason, things are stopping Islam. I mean, Kevin Lee was willing to hand Islam really the ace of spades. The one thing that Islam needs, it isn't skills. Islam's great. It isn't look. Islam looks the part. All that Islam needs is somebody with a name to give him an opportunity. That pulls him up either way. Islam could lose to a name fighter, but have all eyes on him. It's going to help him in the future. He could go out there and get the jump on a name fighter, which is why a lot of name fighters don't want to fight him, which is why Kevin Lee was doing Islam such a tremendous service. Whether Islam understood this or not, look, Islam's in a tough spot. Many fighters go through it. He's a great fighter with a good look at the right age. He checks a lot of boxes that you want in the world of promotion. In many ways, his own skills and his own potential and his own performances are getting in his way. Guys respect him. Guys are scared of him. He needed that Kevin Lee fight, and he didn't get it.
Hey, Chael. So Conor McGregor just got finished up with Donald Cerrone. Everyone I'm hearing is pretty much saying Masvidal, or wait for Khabib, or even hop in for Khabib or for Tony if Khabib and Tony don't end up fighting. One of them pulls out. From where I'm sitting, it seems like a good time for maybe match up Conor McGregor with George St. Pierre, and then the winner of that could fight Khabib versus Tony's winner. So let me know what you think.
You get absolutely no credit. I refuse to give you a pat on the back. Conor McGregor, the biggest star of right now, versus George St. Pierre. The two... Yes, of course that fight works. No credit for you. Anybody can sell a Ferrari. I will be impressed with the guy that can sell the Volvo.
This is Ryan coming in from Canada. So I was wondering, I remember hearing on the Joe Rogan podcast, it was Joe Rogan, Brandon Schaub, and Eddie Bravo. They were watching the Khabib versus Poirier fight. And I think Brandon Schaub, he brings up, it'd be a good fight? Brian Ortega versus Khabib. and I think it was Eddie Bravo. He says, well, Khabib's just simply too big for Brian Ortega. And that statement really got my my noggin jogging, because I'm thinking, you have guys like Stipe Miocic, they're fighting Francis Ngannou. That's a 20-pound difference. Stipe's 240, Francis Ngannou's 260. Brian Ortega is only 15 pounds lighter than Khabib. Why are the lighter weights considered, to be more of a deficit, I guess? Your thoughts?
Weight is a real thing. There's a reason we have categories, okay? To say size advantage, though, we have largely found out that size is a disadvantage, but either one of those terms, in and of themselves, using them mutually exclusive, is going to blow up in your face. They're both broad stroke terms. Size advantage, size disadvantage. You take your side, I'll take my side, but it's a broad stroke, and we have to understand there's going to be a lot of exceptions to the rule. Look, if you want to know why they said, just to answer your question head on, if you would like to know why they said that Khabib is simply too big for Brian Ortega, they like Brian Ortega, they respect Brian Ortega, they do jiu-jitsu much like Brian Ortega. Khabib is too good for Brian Ortega. But as a way of not disrespecting or slighting a great like Brian Ortega, who everybody likes, and by the way, he does the same discipline that you've made your life commitment to, just say Khabib's too big.
Hey, Uncle Chael. Christian from the Pacific Northwest here, feeling a little under the weather with my daughter Viviana.
Hi, Uncle Chael.
We both love you. Love everything you do. Question for you. If you could start your fighting career over again, would you do it exactly the same, or would you be excited knowing what you know now to enter into the UFC with the talent that's out there now and the science behind everything? I'm just curious to know if you, in all of your wisdom, would you be inclined to do it all over again the same way that you did? Or is there a time period that you think that you would have done better or worse than others? What are your thoughts? Take care, buddy. Love you.
Christian, thank you for another question, and tell Viviana hello back, and very beautiful name, young lady. Okay, I got to tell you, Christian, I don't know if there's anything in my life that I would do the same. I do my whole life different. I'd marry the same girl, but everything else, if I had the information that I have now, I'd always do it different. I know exactly when to put it on red. I know exactly when to put it on black. Yes, I would use today's information. I didn't have a whole lot of regrets in MMA as far as the preparation went. I was so tired every day. I would wake up depressed, knowing what I had to go through to get back in bed that night. I mean, I really physically gave it my all, but also having information and knowing the best ways to do it, I will fully agree with you, is a real thing. So one thing that took me a while was to understand that the days that wrestlers dominated MMA are over. And that took me a while to accept. I still thought ultimately this sport is about who can get on top and keep the other guy down. And while that is a large piece of it, for certain styles, some guys never go to that, but for some, that will win you rounds. I mean, that's a really good theory. But what I'm trying to say to you, Christian, is I wish that I would have understood that MMA is a sport in and of itself that has principles that will come from, and then fill in the blank on the art, in my case, wrestling. But it is a sport in and of itself. That wasn't true when I became a fan in 1993. That was not true when I took my first contest in 1997. That was true by 2001. And it took me to about 2005 to accept and to start to understand that. And some of those years, some of those youthful years, some of those more invigorated and motivated years, I do wish I would have had a better vision of where the sport was going. And if I would have had that, I would have been open to more ideas as opposed to only the wrestling specific ones. And I didn't have a closed mind, but it wasn't an open mind either in terms how it could have been. And I was around some people, Coach Robert Follis comes to mind, who was a little bit of a visionary, who did see where this sport was moving. And I think if I could have opened to that a little bit younger in those years, 2003 and 2004, and even going to 2005, I think I could have made some real gains.